She wasn't supposed to fight. She wasn't supposed to rule. She definitely wasn't supposed to be a one-woman rebellion against the biggest empire the world had ever seen. But at just 19 years old, with a child strapped to her back and the British Empire at her gates, Lakshmi Bai picked up a sword and changed history. This wasn't a symbolic fight. This was blood, fire, and strategy. And when the British expected her to surrender, she rode into battle. So why don't most people know her name? Because Lakshmi Bai wasn't just a queen. She was a threat to an empire that wanted obedient colonies, silent women, and easy victories. This is the story of the teenage queen who made them bleed, and why her name still shakes hearts today. Comment where you're watching from. Smash that like button if you're already feeling goosebumps. And let's ride with the Rani. The rise of a warrior queen Manikarnika was born in 1828, but this wasn't the life of pampered royalty. Her mother died young. Her father, a court official in the Maratha Empire, raised her not with lullabies, but with discipline, training, and courage. While girls were taught embroidery and dance, Manu was mastering swordplay, horseback riding, and archery by age 10. She would charge through palace corridors on horseback, barefoot and wild, fearless. She read scriptures and military treatises. She watched the politics of the Maratha Empire unravel. And by the time she turned 14, she was married off to Maharaja Gangadhar Rao of Jhansi, becoming queen of a modest but proud kingdom. They renamed her Lakshmi Bai, after the goddess of power and prosperity, and for a few years, peace ruled. But after her husband's death and the tragic loss of her infant son, she adopted a child as heir. That should have been enough, but the British East India Company saw an opportunity. Using the doctrine of lapse, they declared that because her son was adopted, Jhansi would be seized. What they didn't know was that this queen wasn't going to let them take anything. The empire strikes its first blow. The British expected Lakshmi Bai to mourn, retreat, and hand over her palace keys. What they got was a resistance manifesto wrapped in royal silk. She formally protested the annexation, wrote letters to officials in London, demanded meetings with the Governor-General, even offered her own wealth to protect Jhansi's sovereignty. Their answer? A polite silence, followed by soldiers at her gates. But Lakshmi Bai wasn't idle. She trained her palace guards, recruited women warriors, and personally oversaw the forging of swords and cannonballs. She taught military drills inside palace courtyards. Even children were trained to signal during enemy movements. In 1857, when the Indian Rebellion broke out, the Sepoy Mutiny, everything exploded. Rebel forces across India rose up. British control wavered. In Jhansi, British officers were slaughtered by rebel factions. The company blamed Lakshmi Bai, though she denied responsibility. Still, the writing was on the wall. War was coming, and she chose her side. She raised the banner of Jhansi, not just in defiance, in declaration of war. The siege of Jhansi in March 1858, Sir Hugh Rose and his British forces surrounded the walls of Jhansi. They expected a few frightened troops, a symbolic resistance, and a queen ready to surrender. Instead, they faced a fortified, disciplined, militarized city and a queen in full armor. Lakshmi Bai wasn't behind palace walls sipping tea. She was inspecting trenches, giving battle orders, and even manning cannons on the fort ramparts. She organized a citizens' army. Women, elderly, merchants, anyone who could fight. Even young girls were messengers. Blacksmiths became arms dealers. Her palace became a command center, the most iconic image. Lakshmi Bai charging into battle on horseback, baby strapped to her back, swords in both hands. This wasn't a legend. This was witnessed by British officers who were in complete shock at the sight. The siege lasted a brutal weeks. British firepower tore through the walls, but Jhansi didn't fall. Not until the very last moment, when the walls were breached and resistance was overwhelmed. But even then, she didn't run. She rode out, cut through enemy lines, escaped with her son, and disappeared into the countryside. They hadn't captured a queen. They'd unleashed a commander. The rebel general. Fugitives run. Revolutionaries regroup. Lakshmi Bai found refuge with other rebel leaders, including Tachiato, a guerrilla mastermind and commander. Together, they began reorganizing rebel forces across central India. Lakshmi wasn't just symbolic now. She was leading men into battle, commanding squadrons, organizing supply lines, and conducting war councils. She wore men's armor. She slept with weapons. She had become the embodiment of resistance. In Gwalior, she and her forces recaptured the city, pushing out British control in one of the rebellion's most successful offensives. The British labeled her the most formidable woman in India, but to her people, she was something more. She was Durga, the goddess of war, a living icon. Her legend spread beyond rebel camps. In British-controlled territories, her name was whispered by women and children like a spell. Jhansi Ki Rani, the Queen of Jhansi, and the Empire knew. It wasn't done with her yet. The last battle, June 17, 1858, the day the British finally caught up. In the outskirts of Gwalior, Lakshmi Bai and her soldiers clashed with British forces in a brutal hand-to-hand fight. She wore disguise armor, leading cavalry charges on horseback, striking with twin swords, and refusing to retreat. According to reports from both Indian and British sources, she killed multiple soldiers in combat. She was wounded, bleeding, but kept fighting even when surrounded. She fought like a demon, and finally, she was struck down, possibly by a bullet, possibly a sword. Her last wish, that her body not fall into British hands. Her loyal soldiers built a funeral pyre, placed her body upon it, and set it ablaze. They would never get their propaganda photo. No public execution, no gory trophy. They got nothing. And she became everything. The flame that never went out, Lakshmi Bai's rebellion, didn't stop the British Empire, but it broke its illusion of control. She became a martyr, a war cry, a cultural icon. Decades later, during India's independence movement, her story was taught in secret schools, painted on protest banners, and used as fuel for resistance. She is now buried in textbooks, memorialized in monuments, immortalized in Bollywood films, and epic poems. But more importantly, she lives in the memory of a people who refuse to forget her. She wasn't fighting for power. She wasn't fighting for revenge. She was fighting for freedom, and she never asked permission. Lakshmi Bai didn't need to win every battle. She just needed to show the world what a woman with no army, no king, and no time left could do. And she did more than anyone expected. What if this is the first time you've heard her story? What other names have been buried by empires? Tell us in the comments who else deserves their story told. Like this video if you believe history should be rewritten, not by the victors, but by the truth. Subscribe for more untold legends of warrior queens, rebel leaders, and revolutionaries you were never taught in school. Because the most dangerous thing a woman can be is unafraid, and Lakshmi Bai, she never knew fear.